Hi everyone, let's take a look at number 51 in section 7.3. It's a really nice example of how a systems of equations can be used to solve a complicated application question. Please take a second, click pause, and read it to yourself twice. Okay, now that you've read it to yourself, notice I've underlined the question. Whenever you're solving an application question, you should always underline the question because it helps you define your variables. Question says, how many touchdowns, extra point kicks, and field goals were scored? One variable, second variable, third variable. So let's let x equal the number of touchdowns. Notice I didn't just put touchdowns, it's the number of touchdowns. Y equals the number of extra point kicks, and Z equals number of field goals. Okay. Now let's go back to the top and let's read for information. So the Packers defeated the Chiefs by a score of 35-10. Total points scored came from 13 different scoring plays, combination of each of them, and then I have point values. So notice I have some clear numerical piece of information. One here, and then I have point values. Well, first thing I notice, total points. That word total kind of makes me think about an equal sign. So total points came from 13 different scoring plays. So some combination of these three ways of scoring, how many of them were there? 13. Let's make that our first equation. And just to keep these organized, let's think of this as a quantity. Equation. So x plus y plus z. So some number of touchdowns, number of extra point kicks, and some number of field goals totaled to 13 plays total. What else do I know? Well, this first part says 35-10. But notice X, Y, and Z does not apply just to the Packers or just to the Chiefs. It's both teams combined number of plays. So what's the combined number of points scored? 45. So let's make this next one a points equation, or a value equation, but in context, let's call it points. So X represents touchdowns. How many points is each touchdown worth? 6 points. So 6 points per touchdown. An extra point kick is worth 1 point, so 1Y or just Y. And a field goal is worth 3 points, 3Z, 3 points per field goal. What else do I know? Well, there are two more pieces of information. They're just not as obvious with how we're going to create the equations. The first part is right here. The same number of touchdowns and extra point kicks were scored. So touchdowns, that's X. Extra point kicks, that's Y. Well, let's play around with this. X and Y, they're the same. Well, that can't stay there, right? Because our equal signs have to equal. So how about there? Well, no, that's not going to work because I can't have a variable over here. So let's bring this over and see if we can perform algebra that we actually get an equation we can use. X equals Y. Well, what if I subtract Y from both sides? Well, those cancel. Now I have X minus Y equals 0. Look at that. We got a number on the right-hand side. Now this is an equation we can use. X minus Y equals 0. And that actually makes sense because if there's the same number of touchdowns and extra point kicks, Well, let's say there's 5 touchdowns, 5 extra point kicks. 5 minus 5 would be 0, and they're the same number. So let's call that our same number equation. And remember, these labels are completely up to you. If you have another way of referring to the piece of information that we're looking at, by all means, make them your own. There's one more piece of information. Can you find it? Hopefully, you just said this part right here. There were 6 times as many touchdowns as field goals. So which piece of information would you need to know first? Touchdown or field goals? 6 times as many touchdowns as field goals. Well, let's plug in some numbers. If there's 1 field goal, then there are 6 touchdowns. 2 field goals, 12 touchdowns. So you have to know the number of field goals first. So here's the strategy. If there are X touchdowns, there are 6 times as many field goals. That would equal 0. Okay, quick pause. What's missing? Is this a plus or a minus? Well, this is another equal situation. So there were 6 times as many touchdowns as field goals. So let's let those be equal to each other. Now, I could subtract 6z from both sides, or I could subtract x from both sides. We like our leading coefficient to be positive, so let's subtract. Zero equals x minus 6z. And remember, if it helps, you can always put a placeholder in the middle. The key, though, is, see this plus right here? It doesn't actually exist. This minus is very important, x minus 6z. Just to add a little bit more labeling in terms of where did these equations come from. Remember, this was touchdowns equals the number of extra point kicks. Here we had 6 times as many touchdowns, so 6 touchdowns is the same number, or is equal to, the number of field goals. From these equivalences, we got the equations that we can actually use. Right? These are the equations we could actually use in our system. And now we're ready to solve. So how about for this one, let's throw a label on, let's be consistent. 6 times as many touchdowns as field goals. Okay, so we have 3 variables, 4 equations. Go ahead and solve. Side note, just to make sure that you feel comfortable with this process, and I want you not to second guess yourself, if you do it correctly, your answer should be 6, 6, 1. So that means 6 touchdowns remember, that's X. 6 extra point kicks. That was Y. And 1 field goal. Otherwise known as Z. All right, happy solving. Please remember, send me a message on Remind if you get stuck anywhere along the way.